Most people think interrogations look like this. Bright lights, drugs to get them there, a stainless steel table full of tools, someone slamming their fist. What'd you do last night? That almost never happens. Real interrogations are somewhat quiet and calm, much like this, sitting in a chair. We build interrogations long before anyone ever sits in the chair across from me. Today, I'm going to take you through what actually happens in interrogations and why movies get almost everything wrong. Coming up on Tradecraft for Life. If you've ever watched real interrogations and interviews, police, the federal, military, or intelligence agencies, you already know something really important. It's not always the goal of the interrogator to break a subject or detainee, subject politically correct. But that's not always the goal. And why is that? Because a lot of times you can garner information you need and you want without even taking them through the different variety of approaches that you have to actually break them. A lot of interrogations involve breaking. And what is breaking? Breaking is the subject willingly coming out and telling you what they know about the scenario that they're in and answering your questions willingly. So now you know that. We know the goal in interrogations is really to manage the mind. It's managing the mind of the detainee and getting them to talk freely without even realizing it. The goal is to manage the human mind under pressure and to get the detainee talking freely without them even realizing it. That's a whole nother skill in itself. Myth number one is the interrogator always controls the room. Movies always have the interrogator controlling the room. It has some sort of dominant force and power over the person sitting across from you while they cower in fear. Occasionally you get the movie where they're not cowering and they're trying to stand up to you, but the interrogator's dominance will ultimately break and make that person submit. Well, that's not the case at all. Not even close. In reality, the interrogator will most likely know this during their preparation before they even go into the room. If it's offhand, they will go into the room and they will assess the room. Because you don't go in balls to the wall. There's very few times, very few, that you will actually go in and do that. So it actually takes a level of comfort, and it's almost something you got to go practice in the mirror. Mirror practice is actually not uncommon amongst interrogators, because the more you practice in the mirror, the more comfortable you get. The more comfortable you are, the better the interrogation and the meeting goes. It doesn't matter what kind of interrogation or meeting you're running. You have to see within yourself and understand what's true and that you're confident and that you can take it to them. Because you show weakness in an interrogation, especially when it's against someone who's a little bit higher level and they kind of understand it and know what they're doing. If you show weakness at all, they will literally jump on that. Those are the times that control of the room can sometimes actually escape the interrogator's control in reality. Most of the time, the detainees aren't that stupid. It just depends on the level. Most of the time, they will submit to you because they've been drugged a lot of times in the middle of the night with a hood on their head to a place they don't know. And depending on the interrogation, it could be cold, it could be hot, it could be muggy, all sorts of different stuff. But the control of the room is always controlled by the interrogator. They will allow for it to seem as if the detainee is in control of the room to play on their ego. That's how a real interrogation goes. And that's what gets people talking. That's almost a way to break a handful of people, because what it does is it plays up on the detainee's personal identity, their ego, their self-image. It brings their stress level from up here because of everything I just mentioned about them not knowing where they are, to down here. And sometimes it's because they just need to save face, because they're really prideful. How many of us aren't prideful at times? I know I am. And playing into that pride is huge. You can actually do this in your own personal life if you play into someone's pride. If you notice it, pay attention and notice someone in your life's pride. Pay attention to that. Play into that pride. Don't make it too obvious, but you'll see how you can play into it. And you play into that, and the whole situation that you're currently in, it'll kind of transform it. But you have to notice. You have to notice, and you have to be active about it. Because if you just walk around not noticing anything, then you're just not going to apply it into your life. It's all about noticing. Okay, now we're going to roll into what an actual interrogation is like. It's not too dissimilar to something like this. However, actually, in my point of view, because I've done thousands of interrogations and source operations meetings and interviews and so on, I find that way more comfortable than me sitting here talking to a camera. So this will take time, but it'll be way easier in the long run. But actual interrogations are not necessarily confrontations. Imagine you and your friend are sitting in a room and you're just talking, you're having a conversation, just a normal conversation about your day. You're asking questions. What did you do yesterday? Oh, really? What time did you end up going there? Really? Okay, so what did you do after that? Really? No kidding. That's basically all it is. You're just having a normal conversation. You're just literally paying attention and asking a follow-up after follow-up after follow-up after follow-up of questions. I want it to seem basically like any other type of conversation. Like if you're having a source operation or something, you want it to seem a lot like that. You want it to be natural. You want it to flow. You want it to feel good. And then along the way, you're gonna spot areas within the conversation where that he's not being cooperative. And that's when you'll implement stuff from your interrogation plan that you spent a ton of time preparing. And you will apply some of your approaches. And you have them listed out. It's not uncommon to literally have a notepad in front of you. So having your little cheats is right there, and it's for you to use. But you also might not even use an approach that you thought about before you were going in, because during the conversation, you spotted an opening at a better approach to get him to calm down, or her, and start talking to you. When we're talking about, there's different types of interrogations. You have the federal and the police, and their interrogations. The Bureau and the police is an interrogation that's completely different, because they are looking to convict these people of crimes. As opposed to, you move to the military side. When you're looking for a conviction, before we move on to the military side, when you're looking for a conviction, you are literally questioning them in a different format to better answer some of the questions you need for your conviction and all the paperwork you have to do for that. When you're on the intel side of things, like the agency and military, and you're not trying to go for conviction, it's way different, because you're looking for them just to open up about everything and give you the most valuable information that they have. Sometimes you know kind of what it is. Sometimes you literally have to poke them and prod them with your questions to then start pulling out strings. Most of the time you already know what you're kind of going after, because that's what happens in your preparation. Stuff like a tactical interrogation and interrogation in the field, a little bit different. You're still kind of going to know, because you went out there anyways to roll them up. Unless you're in a situation where you all got surprised, then started detaining people, and then started doing some sort of tactical field interrogation, that would be way different. And then you'd be determining who you're going to keep and not keep. And it can get confusing, messy, and just a lot of chaos. And oftentimes in a situation like that, you really only have 1, 2, at most, a few, 2 or 3 actual qualified interrogators on hand. Unless For some reason, y'all prepared to bring more, but then that's a whole nother situation. So then you have to rely on the units or the people that you're with to help you narrow down when you're dealing with big groups of people. And then you have to specify directions. But those are what the basis of what actual interrogations are like. It's just a conversation. Simple conversation between you and I. There's not often yelling. In fact, there's probably quite the opposite of yelling most of the time. Most of the time, you're trying to make them feel good. You're trying to offer them food. You're trying to make them happy. Like, hey, what can I get you if you're in a detention facility? What can I get you for your cell to make it more comfortable? And this is if they're cooperating, of course. You're just literally talking. And then there's also times where you're both sitting over, depending on what country you're in. Like if you're in Afghanistan, you're both sitting over a map. You're trying to train that dude who knows nothing about a map, has never seen it before, to train him how to tell you where an exact location is. So you can confirm some stuff. So it's really nothing like what you think. It's literally just like a normal conversation that you have. It's a little more intense because as the interrogator, you're in control of the timeline of every event that happens in that room. So sometimes that can get overwhelming, but that's exactly why you spend so much time preparing and putting stuff together. Because you've already run it through your mind half a dozen times at least before you've walked in there. It's really not that difficult. It's really a lot more simple than you would think. Myth number 2, confessions come from pressure. Pressure doesn't create reliable information. It's why a lot of the top countries in interrogation, like the big ones, US, I guess you could say Israel, because they have a good agency in Mossad, Russia, maybe China. So we don't use enhanced interrogation techniques anymore because it was pressure that created so many issues. Because it creates shortcuts for information. Like you're missing stuff along the way. In interrogation, you don't want to miss anything. Even if you're taking the long way, take the long way home so you don't miss anything. Because you're always going to have little strings to pull on. But you also get bad answers from the pressure. They're going to come out and just at some point, they're either going to be completely lying to you, not even necessarily lying, but tell you what you want to hear. And then there's other forms of the enhanced interrogation that are actual physical pressure, like stress positions and stuff like that, and sensory deprivation. For the most part, there have been a couple people who you could maybe say their overall injuries at the end passed away from it, but I don't know if you could actually physically tie them passing away to it. But again, that would be something you would literally have to dig into all the details on. From my memory, I just don't recall something actually being able to be tied to it. But the reason why we don't use them so much anymore, and most of them not at all, because it's too much pressure most of the time. Because you don't need it. It's not like 24 where you're Jack Bauer and you're like, I gotta know this in the next 5 minutes or that nuke is gonna drop on LA. Come on, dude. You gotta tell me what it is. You gotta tell me. Like, no, I imagine if we were in a situation like that someone might actually do that. And I don't know if I would judge them for it. That would be once in a lifetime scenario that I think that you could ask for forgiveness on something like that. But that's not the reality. You do get pressure in scenes and scenarios in real life that are like imminent attacks and stuff like that. And that definitely is pressure. But that's why you have to know what you're doing so you can go in and yes, you can lean on them and give them pressure through your approaches and the way you're talking and the way you're conversing with them. You put pressure on them in that way, and then you also know how to ask the right questions to drill down really quickly to get information you need. But you also have to be careful because no matter how good you are and how proficient you get, Every interrogator always walks out of the room and be like, when they're going to write their reports, they're like, really? I didn't ask that? Like, what in the world? Through all the conversations I've had with many different interrogators, I don't know that I can recall one person ever being like, yeah, that was perfect. That was perfect. We come out and we're like, that was so good. That was awesome. But there's always going to be something that you just overlooked. So that's why it's important to be as proficient and timely, and slow is fast and fast is smooth, as we say a lot in shooting. But it applies to a lot in life, because you want to go slow enough to where you're not missing things, but you also don't want to go so slow that it's pissing everyone off, or it's not there's no good thing about you going that slow. Because there is a point of where it's just too slow and it appears like laziness or incompetence or other stuff. A good interrogator will take their time, and you'll try to get stuff fast, but it usually doesn't work like that. Because if this is a tangent, but if it's a situation that's really in peril, you will literally pause the interrogation and give the dude a break, and maybe he'll eat or something. If it was imminent information and you got it, you'll go and you'll give it to him. I mean, because we're always asking in every interrogation if there's something imminent that's going to happen. It's the point of every interrogation, is to always drill down to that, and to, if something is happening, like, hey, we got to go let people know real quick. Because you can literally relay all the intel to them, and it doesn't have to be in a paper report, but you can relay it all to them, and then you can just do the stuff later. That's what's important about drilling down and making sure you go slow enough during an interrogation. So we have pressure during an interrogation, and we have the approaches that we use for them. And how we apply approaches a lot, it can depend on the source's motivation. You're always assessing, I said source, excuse me on that, but the source or detainee's motivation, right? Because they're all going to have one. It doesn't matter if he's a prisoner or he's a source. They're all going to have a motivation. So a lot of times when they come into the prison, terrible to chuckle at, but I think about it because it applies to all of us, and it makes me chuckle. Because what's the motivation when you're in prison? It's to get out, right? And it's to get out to go back to your family. So it's to get out, go back to your family as quickly as you can. So that's a motivation which can be used as a good tool to talk to them about, like, hey, look, I'm on your side with that. We can work together. You really got to show me that you're willing to work with us in every facet. And you might not be here as long as you think. Some type of deal like that. Motivation is great like that. So that's one of the top motivations for the people in prison. And then sometimes it's other stuff. Sometimes it's motivation is a tough one. It's easier to narrow down in the detention centers. It's a little bit tougher on the source side of things because you have a wide variety to choose from. But really, it comes back to human nature. So don't overthink it either, because human nature is people want sleep, comfort, food, and money so they can get things. You just figure out what they want. And actually, there have been quite a few people, it just depends on the personality, that I've come across where they're like, I don't care about any of that. So then you got to dig for other motivations. But you always find it, and it might not pop up right in the beginning of the interrogation. You might not know it till the second, third, or fourth interrogation. It literally takes a long time sometimes to figure stuff out. You're not walking into an interrogation or a source meeting or an interview, and you're not going to know that person after the first hour that you're with them. It doesn't happen like that in real life either. With exception to ones that are different, and their energy is different. And I don't know how to explain it, but you all probably know something about the energy field when you're talking to a person, and this is way different than any other person I've ever talked to. And it's way better, way different. that type of energy, that happens too in source meetings. And you also don't want to be susceptible to that either. So you got to realize that energy's there and you can use it, but don't fall in love with your detainee. That's the thing. We've had people do that. Those are stories for another video. So the last thing on motivation is talking to the detainee. Many times during the interrogation, the detainee's motivation to go with that is we want to talk to them about, like, hey, don't worry about what you did to get here. That's already happened. That's done and over with. You don't want to push them towards incrimination. So you kind of stay away from that topic, at least in the beginning, right? Because when you're first going into a meeting and you're first making your initial moves on the person, you don't want to ruin your rapport with them by being like, hey, yeah, so you're a douchebag. Like, we saw what you were doing with that 12-year-old boy over there, and that's why we picked you up, and it turns out that you had all this terrorists propaganda on you, and you popped for having your fingerprints on such and such. You don't want to incriminate them on anything. It's gross, and much as it pisses you off, because stuff like that, like what I mentioned, that'll come up, depending on the country and the culture, it'll come up way more than you'd ever think. And you can let it affect you, but you won't be effective in your role. So you kind of got to suppress it. I mean, you can't change who people are. So you just kind of got to let it roll off your back. I've had the chance to not only talk to people who literally do that to the young ones, but I've had they call them chai boys. We've had chai boys come in. I've gotten to be on both sides of that. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily young, because this kid was older, because we did have an age limit to who we could bring in at what point in their life. Like 12 was way too young to detain. I can see 14-year-olds doing stuff, but it's still too young. So you don't want to let your emotions get ahead of you on stuff like that, because there not only that scenario, but there's going to be a handful of other scenarios that piss you off, because they're going to capture people and bring them into you, and they literally got caught after they killed a few Americans or killed a few people that you knew. So you can't let those emotions take over you, at least not in the meeting. Go ahead and do whatever you need to do outside the room. But when you're in that room, you just gotta be solid. As much as you want to point at them in, like, let's say that extreme situation with the Americans that they're highly suspected of killing, you can't let that control that meeting, because otherwise you're gonna make them clam up. That's not how it works in real life. And you have to stay as far away from that as possible, and even in some points make them feel like they're innocent, even if you know they're not. I mean, it's not about that. And when you're not going for conviction, you got a wide variety of stuff open to you. When you're going for convictions, you still have laws to follow on the intel side, but you have a lot of stuff that is going to need to be admissible in front of a judge or some sort of court or some sort of jury. So it changes everything. Myth number 3. You've been sold this idea that, well, I'm leaning away from you, so I'm probably about to be dishonest right now. And I'm crossing my arms so you know that I'm also going to be dishonest. I'm trying to create distance. Look, you've been sold that lie that me shifting in my chair is because I'm being deceiving. The scrunching of my nose means that I'm guilty. Well, those are all not true. And all the interrogators pretty much know this. There are some truths to some of them, and there are actual ways to use some of them to form an opinion and actually create some sort of advantage at times. Like micro expressions. If you're recording, first of all, you're a micro expression, you're never going to see that in real life. So you remember that show called Lie to Me? Forget the dude's name. But he'd be sitting in a meeting and they'd be talking to somebody. He wouldn't even be in the meeting. Straight across from them, sometimes he would be in a glass room off to the side, and they'd be sitting in the room. He'd be like, oh, he just did that micro expression. This is what he's telling you with that. And it just wasn't even the guy right across from him. It was the guy off to the side where you can't get a clear view at it. But even when they're straight across from you, you can't put a whole lot into them. And why is that? Well, one, because even if you can get a good baseline, your baseline is probably still really narrow off a small amount of time. It's probably only a couple meetings at most. So really, to get the best baseline ever would be to have daily contact with these people. And then you could probably start to using some of those with any sort of accuracy. But also, sometimes it just doesn't mean anything. I know it sucks to hear that because it's cool. I mean, look, that micro expression show, I enjoy watching it just as much as you did. But I also like watching stuff like that because I like laughing at them, kind of. I mean, like, sometimes they have good plots, but it's also fun to laugh at them and be like, that's not even close to being true. But there's a reason why we don't use stuff like that in like courts of law and other stuff. There's a reason why even on the intel side, we don't even use polygraph that much. We do every now and again. But just like in the court of law, there's nothing definitively saying that, okay, they were truthful, they were not. It's really, polygraph is the weirdest thing, I think, that in this entire subject, because we put so much on the polygraph and we rely on it so much, and then we say it's not reliable. So like, I don't even know what to think about it, because I don't think it is completely reliable, but I also do think it is somewhat reliable. I think that the reason why we can't rely on it is because literally results vary between, you have some polygraph experts who are way better than the others. And that makes a difference. So as soon as we can take out human error in that, and I'm not saying I want some stupid AI robot to do this like that, because I don't want to rely anymore on computers. Computers fail all the time. Computers are a massive failing point, and people don't understand that. That's a different topic for another time. But I would rather rely on the human side than that. I do think there's kind of a fine line to where we could get on the polygraph thing, where we could get humans to be just a minuscule amount in the error, so then we can actually make them and classify them as more reliable. I wish we would. To an extent, the government does think it's worthwhile because they literally give you a polygraph for certain clearances you get. So they wouldn't be doing that if they didn't think there was some sort of validity behind them. So again, I don't know. I'm half a dozen in this one, half a dozen in this one. It's really, the more research you do on it, the more you're just like, well, crap, I don't know. And then you read an article one day and you sway this way or you sway that way. So outside the polygraph, the reason why me moving around in my chair, crossing my arms, this and that, well, first of all, it depends what meeting you're in, or interrogation, because you do many of them. And this guy, it could be his first interrogation ever, and he just got brought in the middle of the night with a black hood and earbuds on, all that stuff. So, like, he could be freaking out of his mind. And they do a lot, but some of them do, some of them don't. I mean, the ones that don't, I think it's because they've been brought in quite a bit. But it's a new environment. They could have been up for days, fighting, whatever. I mean, there's just so much that goes into it, and it's stressful for them, at least at first. After they've been in an interrogation facility for years and years on end, then they're just annoyed. It's not stressful then. But those aren't reliable methods that we use for interrogation. What we focus on is the information and how they're saying things. It's funny because the way you say words can indicate way more than the way you do stuff with your body. However, you can do stuff with your body when you're saying words, and those are different indicators, and those are big. Because if you say something that's really abrasive and then you go to block yourself off, that's a big indicator right there. So those are things we do watch out for. We just don't put a lot of stock in them until we get a baseline. But they have to be combined with words. So once you combine what they're saying to how they're acting, then you can start to use some more stuff more reliably. But just using that alone, it doesn't do much. I do think there is some truth to the micro expressions. However, you need a camera. And you're not going to catch it during the meeting. You have to catch it afterwards. And just because you caught it on the camera actually doesn't make it true. And it makes it really hard to go in and talk about it again. It's just a really hard thing to do. But you can catch them. You can, because there are certain facial features that you do, like shock in your eyes, in your face, anger. There's certain stuff you do for all your emotions within your face. That's a thing. I'm not saying that isn't a thing. But the reliability of it during an interrogation just isn't there. Baselines are key to what we have to use to make those assessments. But what we rely on more is their words, their timelines that they give, the sequencing of how they say stuff happened. Because if they're lying, they're often going to get stuff out of sequence. And then just details. A lot of times when people are lying, they're giving too much detail from time to time. And that's not always the case, because it depends. If they're a talker, they're just going to give a lot of detail. Like when I get comfortable and I'm talking, like I give a lot of detail and I'm not lying. These are things you have to pay attention to. So, I mean, or maybe I'm just lying to myself. I don't know. That's a thing to think about. So with that, one of the last big things that we look for is going back over the story and repeating the question that they've answered before, but in a different way. Trying to not make it obvious that you're asking it again. Sometimes you can't get around it. Sometimes you just do it because, and it's funny because when you're training for this, you're literally just trying to get all this out of the way. But when you're doing it in real life, you're like, well, I need to make this seem realistic because it's good stuff, and I need to make sure it's true and that they're not lying to me. Because as soon as they start to show indications of lying, that makes a lot of things difficult. So we've already talked about this a little bit, and it's on interrogation in the movies being a singular event. Like, that's not the case at all. Oftentimes, there is maybe a 30-minute interrogation because maybe it got cut short and you wanted to do 2 hours. And then you have to come back later. Or maybe you just wanted to only do 30 minutes because you knew what you had to go after, and so on. Oftentimes, you can find yourself going over on interrogations, and you kind of have to rein yourself in, because you can go off the rails and extend them past what they should be and what they shouldn't be, because you're just having that normal conversation. I mean, it's really a normal conversation. So you're going to find yourself comfortable for the most part. Sometimes you'll find yourself uncomfortable, but that's very situational. Just the movies show one interrogation and then you're off to the races and going. And not that that doesn't happen, where you're in an interrogation and then you have a mission you have to go and roll out on because of that interrogation. But there's going to be many interrogations that happen after that. As well as sometimes it takes many interrogations to build up stuff to be able to roll out on that mission. So it just depends. But it's usually not this one and done. It's not a wham, bam, thank you, ma'am type of thing. It's not that at all. Real interrogations are a pretty long process. And if we're honest, depending on when we're in Afghanistan, those detainees getting interrogated have rotating through anywhere from 1 to 2 new interrogators every year, at least, if not more. I mean, it just depends on the year and the rotations and stuff like that. But when they're first getting wrapped up initially, and they're taking a slow process from center to center to center, and they're eventually going to end up like at the state or the federal prison. So you have to take the steps to get there. It takes a long time. There are times where in the process of of doing the interrogations, where it kind of turns into like something like a source operation where you physically go places. That's much more rare in that setting. It's not unheard of. So let's talk about a tool that is often overlooked. Yeah, that probably got pretty uncomfortable for you. At least for a second. You had to look around being like, wait, what's he doing? He's not talking. Silence is a tool that we use. It's an approach. It's a tool because when you're silent and you're not talking and you were having a normal conversation and it was flowing, people get uncomfortable in that. And then they start filling in with stuff. So either they're going to fill in with just talking about whatever, or they're actually going to start telling you what they did. And sometimes when you ask them a question and there's a long enough pause, you can even split questions to where you're halfway through the question and they fill in that pause. See that pause I just gave you? Like when I was there, they'd be like, oh, I got, okay, no, well, so you didn't mention it, but I was doing this and this. It's definitely a tool, and it's not a tool on YouTube because everybody looks to fill in that silence with something. Sound, this or that, and you just try to cut it all out. In real life, in interrogation, you literally want to use that because it's more helpful than you think, and it can go a long ways. You also don't want to, you just got to work with it because you don't want to make it awkward either. If you use it correctly, either they can clarify some stuff or they can even elaborate on some stuff. And like I mentioned before, sometimes they will accidentally just disclose stuff to you that they didn't even mean. I've been in an interrogation before where you're sitting in there and you're asking questions and old dude, you could tell that he didn't want to cooperate, but you just got to talking in the right direction, and he's literally spilling the beans on some stuff and you're just letting him go. And about 80% of the way through the topic, he realizes it and he's like, oh crap. And he just stops talking because he realized he was like, oh, well, what did I do? It's a very powerful tool. It's an underused approach. However, it's an approach that can be quite funny if you use it in a certain way. And we'll get into that in another video on the silent approach. I can make a video talking about some of the funny approaches that I've seen and see how interesting that video would be. Okay, I'm going to say this a few different ways. Myth number 5. The truth always comes out. It always does. And there's rarely a clean confession. Oh, I did it. Or a clean break, how you want to call it. I mean, because that's what we call it, but it's not what the movies are. See, what the movies did is take our terminology and then they made it spicy. But there's no clean break and no clean confession. A lot of times it's when I was early on doing interrogations, I didn't even realize that I broke them early on because I was still learning. So I was in the beginning phases. I just knew they were giving me information, so I was just going with it. And then after the fact, sometimes you'll go back and you'll watch the interrogation. After the fact, you'll be like, oh, I need to go review the tape and see where the point was that he started just breaking and talking to me. And sometimes you don't get the clean break, and sometimes you get partial bits of information because they don't break, but they're still giving you information. And it's really weird. It's not clean all the time, but I don't know on the police side of things if I've seen them with the partial confessions and stuff like that, but I don't know how different it would be in terms of some stuff, but sometimes they will explain stuff away. We still have people admit, even when we're not looking for conviction and confession, oh, you did this. Even when we're not looking for that, people will still come out and tell you. It's like, oh, don't worry about it, dude. Like, I totally get that. Even if it's like off the wall crazy and you're like, in the back of your mind, you're like, screw that, man. Like, you're a piece of shit. They want you as an interrogator to justify what they did as right, or they want that emotional occasion, like a horrible person and so on. And you would be surprised at some of the people that comes out of, like, because you're like, wait, what? Because you would think that some of the biggest, baddest ones wouldn't care at all, but they tend to. And then you get a lot of rationalization from a lot of them too. Excuses galore. Oh, well, this is why I did that. Again, when you're just looking for the information and not a conviction, you don't care about their conviction. You will definitely note it, and you will definitely take it in as a form of evidence in the future. And that's where it would differ from me doing interrogations overseas on non-citizens as opposed to citizens, because it would shift quite a bit. Okay, quick note from military intelligence. If you are doing an interrogation on a U.S. citizen, you have to get special authority for it first. And if you are in an interrogation or any sort of source meeting where they end up turning out to be a U.S. citizen, somehow you found out or you figured it out halfway through, you would have to terminate your meeting or your interrogation, and you would have to go get that special authority. So we don't have the authority just to interrogate any U.S. citizen just because we want to. It has to come from higher powers than us. In the interrogation, if something like a confession were to come up, when we think about it, the truth always comes out in the end. And the truth about this is there's an uncomfortable reality about Hollywood and how they portray stuff. And we don't like it because it doesn't give us the fizz, as Wrangler Star would say. Interrogations are something that are pretty often, they're pretty equal in terms of their setting and the emotions in the room. I mean, you're not going to have one person on edge while the other person's screaming down at them, or vice versa. You're just not going to get that a lot, because you don't get good information that way. So you're going to get a lot of the conversation like you have with a friend or someone where they're sitting right across from you. And it's going to feel professional. It's not crazy like you'd think it would be, with people being unprofessional, blasting all this music. I mean, stuff like you would see on the TV shows that create like the SEER training, where they're literally blasting music and putting them in tubs of cold water and, all that stuff. It doesn't happen. Torture, it's not really a thing. I mean, I imagine in some realms of the world it still exists, but it was nothing that I ever came across. Because it doesn't work. It works to deliver pain, but you can't trust the information you get from it a lot of the times. So, and I won't even say that there hasn't been torture that has worked positively, because, I'm sure there has been. But I think more often than not, you are going to get that information. So knowing that, there'd be no benefit in doing it. There really wouldn't be. I only speak for what I've known in my time in working for our country, the U.S. So I don't know what other countries do, and I don't know where they stand on it. But for the most part, I don't think many do, if they do at all. And I don't know. Really, interrogations feel professional. You shouldn't be dragging to want to go to them. A lot of times, the detainees are excited to go to interrogations, Because they're like, ooh, I get to go on a field trip. I get to go somewhere new, and I get to eat real food, like good food. He's going to bring me a soda. He's going to bring me something. I asked for him for this. I get to go smoke. I mean, you got to do all sorts of stuff. So a lot of times, they look forward to it. And because of all that stuff, they're gonna be more straightforward with you. But that's why even after some people have been in detention facilities, you go back and you talk to people who've been there 6 months, to a year. Because sometimes they literally haven't gotten talked to for a long time. And then they get to come back and have those amenities. I mean, it might open up new pieces of intel. Granted, there comes a time where intel's old, and old is old, but still, there's still some stuff that is always worth knowing, even if the information's old. Because old information isn't necessarily bad information. It's just not really actionable in most cases. And I say most cases because I don't think you can't put anything into it always works like this or it's always like that, because there's always exceptions to everything. And there might even be an exception to that of which I just said. So now you kind of understand interrogations better and what they actually are. It would be, I don't know how to do animation yet, but it would be fun to put some of this stuff into animation and kind of have them acted out as they go. That would be something that if I learn how to do it down the road, I might actually end up redoing some of this and re-talking about some of this. But a lot of these points that we talked to today roll into a dozen other topics. I had to stop myself from going down rabbit holes because you can rabbit hole, each topic flows into the other topic, and you can go on all day long talking about a lot of this stuff because there's so much information that you can talk about with how it works and how certain theories go there, why this works, and then how it applies to real life. I mean there's just endless rabbit holes that I can go down with it. I literally have to stop myself. So if there was something that you want to hear about or that you heard, comment below about what you want to hear more about, and I will definitely make videos of those. And I will definitely proceed forward with making videos about some source operations next time. So you got to subscribe and tune in. Next time, we're going to actually review an interrogation and go over it. I might review Epstein's deposition if I can find anything besides 5 minutes of them talking, because I've heard most of it is I plead the fifth. So if they're not talking much in the deposition, because the deposition is an interrogation or an interview. That's why I don't get why these people don't go to training for it, because it would help so much. You're asking a lot of questions. It helps to go to interrogation training, not so you become a qualified interrogator, but so you understand questions and how to ask them better. It would benefit so many people out there because so many people don't know how to ask questions the right way. And even when you do know how to do them, like me, if I'm rusty, I can still screw it up, but then I can fix it and I can go back and correct it, and I know the steps to take to go forward. But it's so helpful to ask questions the right way because they take you so far. And an example of people who don't know how to ask a single good question on the face of this earth, I would say when you listen to the people at Congress talk. Every once in a while, they'll get a zinger, but that's it. They suck. Those are the people who we should be given literal classes to and training on how to ask questions properly, because what do? They bring in all these people all the time to talk to them, to determine stuff for the American public. And when they don't know how to question, it's like, why even have this meeting where you bring these people in and then you show the public that you asked them one good question out of 20 questions when you could have asked them 20 good freaking questions? Why even do that? Why show your incompetence? You can be more competent. You just have to have someone come teach you how to ask questions the right way. And it's not that hard. It really isn't that hard. It just takes practice and dedication. And out of all the stuff we spent, that would actually be something worthwhile to spend money on, because that's part of their job, is asking the questions. And when they're dumb as a box of rocks at it, it doesn't benefit anyone anything. Not to mention, it doesn't mean anything when anyone gets called before Congress. Too bad it doesn't mean anything. It should mean something. Something should come out of that. Rather than all these people get called in front of Congress and they answer questions and then nothing ever comes from it. Like, we need to fix that process, that something can potentially come from it, because then it holds nobody accountable. So that's just my thought on that. With the question thing, absolutely, we need to fix it. 110%. But see, rabbit hole. And I'm good at the rabbit holes. And it just is what it is. Make sure to tune in next time so you can watch us go through a real interrogation. We can actually point out micro expressions where we think some of them are valid and some of them aren't. If you have a specific interrogation video that you want to request, I really don't care which one we do. It doesn't matter to me. We can do it live, which actually might be a little more fun, or we can do it recorded. There's a high likelihood I'll release one recorded before that, but if you do want to do a live one, put in requests and we can literally go over them live. It's too easy, because live we can rewind, look back, point out certain stuff as you ask the questions on it. Because not only is something like this good, it teaches you how to look at people in a different light, how to ask questions differently. It's something I continue to do too, because we get better at it. And life is all about improving daily, even on stuff you already know, because you can always get better at stuff you know. And I appreciate, like this, YouTube, for example. I am new to it, as you can tell, and I will get better at it, and it will be just as easy one day as me sitting down across from somebody in an interrogation. And I won't lie, it's been a while since I've done an interrogation. I would be rusty the first one I go into, but I will easily ease into it, and it'll just be like riding a bike. So, which I am hoping that this will be like riding a bike. I just have to get used to staring at a little piece of black metal with a lens on it. So, but anyways, I appreciate, subscribe so we can keep moving forward and doing this.